Good evening and welcome to Uncensored. I'm your host, Bruce McAllister. Thanks for being with us tonight. We have a lot to unpack. Just before we get to our panelists and introduce them, let's tee up the subject material tonight. We'll talk about COP26, 400 jets on the tarmac over in Glasgow, and countless limousines and cars idling nearby. What's it all for? And is there a giant hypocrisy in it? Our panel will weigh in. Our Prime Minister with a new cap announcement on oil and gas emissions, the fallout already being felt in Alberta. What does it all mean? We will weigh in on that also. And a new federal environment minister, a former Greenpeace activist and anti-oil and gas advocate. We'll ask our panel about that. Also, a giant wind farm planned for Alberta, 18,000 acres. Nobody's talking about it. One of our panelists is. She knows all about it, and we'll get to the bottom of it, including details on the German investor who stands to profit. And we will conclude this evening with this. What can Albertans do about the situation we are in? One of our panelists, the author of the Free Alberta Strategy. We will talk about that and the path going forward. Now let's meet our panelists, starting with Danielle Smith. Danielle, the Executive Director of the Alberta Enterprise Group, the former leader of the Wild Rose Party, and a common sense conservative commentator. Danielle, always good to see you. Thanks for being here tonight.
Hello, Bruce.
Rob Anderson, practicing lawyer. Rob, also former Wild Rose member, former finance critic, and author of the aforementioned Free Alberta Strategy. Good evening, Rob.
Hey, Bruce.
And Donna Kennedy-Glanz joining us tonight, a face you'll probably recognize. Donna's been doing a lot of political commentary of her own. An author, a former energy analyst, and Donna, a quick plug for your book coming up. Here it is, Teaching the Dinosaurs to Dance, coming out in the spring, correct?
That's right. Thank you, Bruce.
Okay, well, we'll talk more about that maybe at some point during the show, because everybody says it's a great title. What's the book about? So we will, I promise, leave some time for that. Want to start with the summit, though, everybody. This is what everyone is talking about in Canada. Danielle, let's begin with you. What do you make of it? Are we getting anywhere? We've got 30,000 people over there. What's the result?
Well, I think we were all waiting to see what the Prime Minister would do in response to the equalization referendum, which gave a strong mandate to Premier Jason Kenney to pursue taking equalization out of the Constitution. And I think appointing Stephen Guilbeault is the big middle finger that he gave to us in response, because I think there's no other way to interpret the fact that we now have a radical Greenpeace environmentalist in that position, who, when he got elected a few years ago, said he would make it his mission to address the issue of fossil fuel use. The other thing that has me quite concerned is that when the Premier was asked about this oil and gas cap on emissions, he said, yeah, well, I tried to talk to the Prime Minister about this after I got elected in April 2019, but he didn't seem that interested. And that says to me that there's been practically no, or definitely zero, cooperation and collaboration on some of the great things that our energy companies are doing in Alberta. And I really fear what it means is that we're seeing the Prime Minister set to go down the same path as we're seeing in Quebec, which has begun with a ban on oil and gas exploration. It wouldn't surprise me if he's going to try to push the same thing across the country. Definitely not a positive step.
Yeah, for sure. And I want to come back to Guilbeault, obviously, Guilbeault, and ask about him a little bit more in depth. But first, I want to talk about the summit in general. Rob, you see, I think somebody had said 30,000 delegates over there, 400 jets on the tarmac. And here we are in the name of cleaning up the planet. There's a hypocrisy to all of this. What do you make of it?
Well, I mean, there's huge hypocrisy, but the problem here is the climate alarmists. They aren't being truthful about the urgency of the situation. That's well documented. I mean, the temperature models over the last 20 years have grossly over-exaggerated the actual temperature change of the Earth. It's just one of 100 of examples. But because they're not being honest, the solutions they're forcing on us right now from these ridiculous summits are very dangerous, because these policies are causing energy prices and therefore inflation on everything to soar, which is especially destructive and harmful to those in poverty or close to the poverty line. And that results in actual damage and people actually dying of starvation in certain areas, increased violence, drug abuse, all kinds of social ills that really hurt people, because affordable and reliable energy is the key to lifting people out of poverty. And these people at these conferences, including our Prime Minister and his environmental minister, when they focus on shutting down Alberta's oil and gas industry rather than harnessing it to develop the technologies that will allow us to power economies more efficiently and sustainably, they actually worsen the very problem that they are trying to solve, especially as poor energy-hungry countries look to burn coal and even wood in some cases to meet their needs. So they're completely backwards on how they're addressing this issue. And of course, their hypocrisy knows no bounds.
Well, we should mention one of our panelists has been to one of these summits before. Don, I know you you were at one in Paris, I believe. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but what did you learn from that, and what are you taking away from this one?
Thanks, Bruce. I actually did go to COP21, and I actually took my son. One of my sons came with me. I went on my own dime. I went economy, just for the record, and I took with me the viewpoints. Actually, 40 people had gathered before that summit and reached out across Alberta, talked to 500,000 Albertans, and we took those viewpoints of Albertans to not just the government talks or the corporate talks, but we actually took that into advocacy space. And it was a bit like a carnival. It was 3 stages. One was for the diplomats, and it was, very, can you imagine coming together as that many politicians and coming up with language everybody agreed on? It's really
Good
diluted discussion. And then you had corporations, and they were trying to share best practices. And frankly, Canada has a lot of best practices. Coal, look what we've done in Alberta on coal. Look what we've done on methane. Look what we've done on conservation of land. We have some really, really good practices to share. And that was pretty constructive space. But I spent 90% of my time with the advocates. And believe me, I felt a little weird in that space at times because I was the target of criticism, because I was coming with viewpoints from people who were saying all over Alberta, we get it that we have to do energy transition. We understand climate change, and Rob, some people don't believe it, but lots of people believe it. And I grew up on a farm, and my farming family really understand that climate change is happening. So they just don't know. They wanted to talk about how to transition, and they wanted to tell people in Paris that these are the consequences of your choices. You can say, no more oil sands, but this is the result. And do you understand that result? So it was kind of a human check-in, Bruce, but it was a lot of drama. I mean, now today we've got, Bill Gates, and we've got Leonardo DiCaprio. I mean, it's a place, it's like a Davos for the environmentalists, and it's a really hip place to be. So it's not surprising people are there, but I think a lot of the work gets done outside of those venues.
Okay, so let me stay with you, and we'll go reverse order this time, Donna. So there's a lot of noise, frankly, about who wasn't there. Our premier wasn't there. Now, when you were there, Premier Notley was there, correct? Premier at the time?
Yes.
So how do you view that? Should Premier Kenney have been there, and what might he have accomplished if he was?
Actually, I thought a lot about that. I know a lot of people are really critical of him not showing up and defending our, the good stories, and sort of being there is a bit of a foil to Trudeau right now. But to be honest with you, I think it probably is a good idea for him not to have gone. It's a stage where people want the drama, and what would happen is, Trudeau gets up and says, we're going to put a cap on oil and gas emissions, which kind of, we all know. I mean, to Danielle's point, I mean, this has been around since the NDP. This didn't change. It's been with us. We all know that's what's going to happen. So it's not really a surprise, but do we want to have that conversation between Trudeau and our premier in a public space where, there's a lot going on? Carney, who is viewed as a really grounded player in all of this, financial guy, trusted, and he's getting attacked by Greta right now. So I don't know. I think maybe it was a wise move for Kenney not to go.
Well, I love, Donna, that you're with us tonight because I can already see some points that you're going to disagree with Rob on, with Danielle on.
Yes.
This is great for discussion. And frankly, I'm with you a little bit. I didn't see the need for another delegation going from Alberta, just wondering what they might accomplish. That said, you want to be front and center where you can be. Rob, what did you think? Should the Premier have been there?
That's a tough one. I believe he should be there. I believe that there should be an Alberta delegation there. I agree that might have limited use. But I think it's important, like even in that, in what Donna was saying there, and I find her position to be extremely reasonable. It's very important to, we did this in COVID too. You're either anti-vax or you're pro-vax. You know, you're either anti-science or you're pro-science. The issue that many people are taking, and if you look at Michael Schellenberger, for example, and other IPCC contributors and so forth, what they have an issue with, and what I have an issue with, is climate alarmism. That to me is extreme. It's not that these people are, many of us are denying that climate change is happening. Of course it's happening. It's always happened. And we have to figure out how we can make sure that we're not affecting it in a way that is detrimental to the human race. I think everyone agrees on that. But the alarmism, the absolute frothing at the mouth of that you see at these events and by Trudeau and by his environmental minister that says, oh, we're gonna, this is gonna happen. We're gonna have runaway global warming by 2030 if we don't cut it back to such and such, or 2050. But these predictions have been shown to be wrong religiously for the last 20 to 30 years. I mean, you just got to look at the data. And so people are saying, look, we have an issue here to address. Let's address it, but let's use best practices. Let's think through these things. And the great example here is coal versus natural gas. I mean, China and India are literally firing up dozens of new coal-fired plants monthly because they have to. Their people need the energy. And as everyone knows, these plants are literally double the emissions intensity of natural gas. So if you're an alarmist, or if you want to, out of caution, reduce CO2 emissions around the world, like perhaps Donna, myself, and Danielle might want to do, I'm not going to speak for them, but why would you not support fostering trade and pipelines and tankers that result in clean Alberta liquefied natural gas heading to Asia by the boatload, so that some or all of these coal-fired plants could become natural gas plants, and then reinvesting a part of that wealth generating revenue into further technologies that work on bringing the burning of fossil fuels closer to net zero. And the reason why they don't is they either lack education, vision, or in many instances, in my view, they're bought off and paid for by certain special interests. But free and clear thinking citizens need to stand up and speak out about this. And that's why I think the Premier should have attended.
Well, you made a very good case, and some of those things, Rob, probably the Premier could have said had he been there. Danielle, pick up on that, and also the fact that Rob mentions China and India, and of course they're not even at the table. So I don't know how we're going to get them to move on anything when they're not even participating.
Well, I would say the Premier definitely should have been there, but he has to be there with something more than a lame announcement, which is what he did on the same day that Justin Trudeau announced the cap on oil and gas emissions. He said, "Oh, look at these projects. We're going to remediate or reduce emissions by 7 megatons by 2030." That is nowhere close to being part of the conversation. If you pick up on Rob's point about our LNG being exported to displace coal, if we could get credit for that through the mechanisms that are available in the Paris Accord, that would get us towards a net zero target in Alberta. If we start looking at bitumen, and I've seen a number of proposals, I think people are familiar with Bitcrude and Canapux. If you take that kind of approach, that we won't use bitumen for combustion purposes, that we'll use it for asphalt or we'll use it for construction materials, that gets us well on our way towards a net zero goal. If you look at the capability of carbon capture, storage, and utilization, the ability to capture CO2, turn it into useful products, or bury it underground, we've got so much pore space. That gets us towards our net zero target. Hydrogen, fuel of the future as well. We've already got projects on the go to transform our long-haul trucking to hydrogen. That gets us towards the goal. Then add in our foresters who are planting more trees than anyone else, our ranchers who are sequestering CO2 in soils, as well as our producers, our farm producers who are doing the same thing. When Yves-François Blanchet decided to go on his platform yesterday and challenge Alberta that we shouldn't have an equalization program, we could have a green equalization program. I say I'll take that bet, because with the kind of technologies we're talking about, we will get to net zero faster than anywhere else in the country, and Quebec will be paying us for the benefit of capturing their soil. We've got direct air capture as another major initiative. One smart company, Avatar Innovations, has partnered with Elon Musk to develop that technology. So I don't know why we run away from this. I don't know why we fear it. If we believe in innovation, then we should embrace innovation. We should be there to make the arguments, and we should accept that challenge, because I firmly believe that without our energy sector taking the lead in this, the world isn't going to create these kinds of solutions without us. And so we've got to have the confidence that we should be at the table. And I think the Premier could have been there with that message.
Points well made, and it would be tough to debate with any of you, frankly, no matter what position you're taking. They're both communicated very well. Danielle, when you mention carbon capture and storage, I think of the great work that Enhance Energy is doing in Alberta with the Alberta Carbon Trunk Line. More than 1 million tons sequestered annually, with a capacity to do much more. So you're right. We do have innovation here in Alberta. We need to talk more about it. However, when Quebec or the Prime Minister seemingly give you the middle finger in Alberta, and appointing Stephen Guilbeault as Environment Minister, a lot would say they just did that. How do we really believe that they're interested in our innovation, or is this indeed about shutting Alberta's oil and gas industry down and transitioning to other energy?
It's absolutely about shutting Alberta's oil and gas industry down, and I don't think that we can sugarcoat that. That's clearly what the extreme environmental movement wants. However, what's interesting about it is that I think by being so extreme, they're actually alienating some who really want to solve this problem. I've most recently met two environmentalists, Paul Stevers with a group called Climate San, and Matthew Klippenstein with the Hydrogen Association of Canada. Both of them say they live on the left. Both of them very concerned about CO2 emissions, but both of them realize that the only industry that is able to roll out technology at scale is the energy sector that we have pioneered right here in Alberta. You're not going to create a wind farm solution to this global problem. You are not going to create a solar panel solution to this problem. You need the kind of technologies that only our industry is capable of doing. And so if you're serious about solving the problem, then you're not actually going to achieve it with what the Greta Thunbergs and the extreme environmentalists are saying. In fact, when you look at the rollout of wind and solar, the places where it's been the most successful, rolled out with the most penetration, is a place where we have natural gas as a backup, because with intermittent power, the only way you can work it into your grid is you've got to be able to turn on base power in an effective way as soon as that occurs. So there's no reason why the wind and solar industry should be oppositional to the natural gas industry. They're part and parcel. They need to coexist together, and they need to grow together. And the message that the extreme environmentalists have, that it's going to be wind and solar and nothing else, it's been proven even by the leftists, like Michael Moore in his documentary, Planet of the Humans. It's been proven that can't possibly happen. So I don't know why we continue to operate in the fiction that somehow they have the upper hand on us. They don't. We've got the upper hand on this, and we need to be confident in asserting it.
Well, they're certainly pushing us down that road, aren't they, with the cap announced by the Prime Minister on oil and gas emissions. Rob, is it even hidden anymore, the agenda, the message that appears to be coming out of Ottawa? And how do the office towers in downtown Calgary deal with this?
Well, it's not a hidden agenda anymore. I mean, that's pretty clear. I mean, the Prime Minister, I think he tried to walk back some comments he made on previous campaigns about phasing out the oil sands and so forth. But now it's pretty clear. It's abundantly clear. The stated objective of this government is to phase out and end the energy industry here. And the way you do that is you let the current projects play out. You let them gather what they're going to gather, produce what they're going to produce, and then you just make it impossible for there to be new investment. And right now, Alberta is seen as one of the most unattractive places in the world to invest new oil and gas money. Sure, you can, through fracking and some things, there's some existing plays. Of course, the large oil sands plays that are already in the ground and operating, those will play themselves out, and there'll still be revenues generated from there. But this is just not a place that you invest right now. And that's the goal. That is the goal of the Trudeau government. That's the goal of Ottawa, is to phase out the entire energy industry over the next 10 to 20 years. And the harms that is going to cause this province, the devastation, the loss of jobs, the loss of revenue, the effect that it'll have on health, social services, education, all of these things is remarkably destructive and irresponsible in every way of this federal government, to go down that road of the solution here. We all know that we're transitioning, but that transition is not away from oil and natural gas. But that transition is not going to take 10 years worldwide. That transition is going to take closer to 50 to 100 years worldwide. And we can either be part of that transition in a way that where we have the revenues and we enjoy the bounty of our natural resources, or we can allow Venezuela, Saudi Arabia, Iran, etc., to supply oil to the world with cruddy environmental records, and obviously treating their people in a not very good way. We can't allow that to happen. We have a role to play, and the federal government wants to end that role, and it's irresponsible.
Donna, you want to pick up on that?
Oh yeah, I'm an energy nerd, so yes. I had the portfolio of electricity and renewable energy. I think it was the first portfolio in Canada. I had that in 2013, 2014. And I come out of the extractive sector, so I had to prove myself that I actually believed in renewables, and I really do. To Danielle's point and to what Rob's saying, I think, we have such an abundance of energy possibility in Alberta. We can weave together stuff that nobody else can do in most places in the world. It's quite amazing. And during this transition, until we get batteries, we are going to need to do that. That's just the reality. We live in a cold country, and we're going to need natural gas to back up wind. That's just a fact. I wish it was different, but it's not. That's the way it is. So I think it's what I ask myself all the time, Bruce, is I follow the money. And right now, yes, we have a lot of ideology coming out of federal government leadership, and we have had for a long time. That has not changed. That's been the same. Regardless of who is environment minister, we still know what's coming out of the prime minister's office. That's been pretty locked in for a while. What's more interesting is who lends money to the energy sector. So I've got lots of friends, and one of my sons was CFO of a junior oil, and great company, great little company, doing well, ethical, creative. And the banks came to him last Christmas and said, you know what, we love you guys. We think you're doing great, but our policy is we're not going to loan to small players anymore. You're going to have to sell your assets to those guys over there. And my son's gone into a different business. Like, that's the reality. That's what's going on in Alberta. We have to transition. But what I am watching really closely, and Bruce, I hope we get to talk about this, is what's going on with who is funding renewables, and why are they why are all these foreign investors showing up? I know we have great assets, but I'm back to follow the money.
Okay, look, we can, and I have an outline to follow, but you guys all mess it up because you just continually raise the next topic before we get to it.
Let's talk about it.
Let's fine. Let's just stay right here. Okay, so Donna, let's let our listeners and viewers understand what you're following. There was a hearing underway the last couple of weeks, maybe longer, about a huge proposed wind farm near Lomond, Alberta, and you can give us some of the details. 18,000 acres, I believe, 83 of these giant statues, whatever they call them. This thing is immense. Nobody is talking about it. It's a German investor that's here who is making all of the money? And give us some insight.
Okay, well, I'll try to not be unruly, Bruce. Sorry about that. Seriously, I am nerding out. To watch an Alberta Utilities Commission hearing via Zoom on a renewable energy project is, yeah, it's not for the faint of heart. It's been going on for the last couple of weeks. We've heard recently that there's a lot going on in Vulcan County. The biggest solar farm in Canada is going on in Vulcan County, and Amazon's going to buy the electricity, and Green Gate's doing the project, and isn't that fantastic? And it is fantastic. In this same little community, I drove down there on Sunday. In this same little community near Lomond, Alberta, Lomond, a gigantic German multinational wants to, if they get permission, construct 83 wind turbines that are taller than the Calgary Tower and have a sweep that's almost that tall. It is a remarkable investment. It's going to be, if they are successful, the biggest wind farm in Canada. I mean, gosh, we start to sound like Texas with all these big boots things going on. So I'm curious, why are they coming here? Why are they coming to Alberta? They've never invested here before. So I went deep. I went really deep. And they are investing here because, yes, and under the NDP government, we had, ISO, the electricity, ASO, Alberta Electricity Service
System Operator.
Oh, system operator. Thank you. I just call them ASO. They had a bid for 3 wind farms, and people bid, and those projects went ahead. Good stuff. Now this government has opened it up, and if you bid on these projects, you bid, you get to generate the electricity. But not only do you just get the right to sell the electricity to Albertans, you also get the green credits. Now, even the NDP didn't do that. So it used to be that you have this great big cake that was electricity that you could sell, and the icing, this little sliver of icing, was the green credits. Today, even the market surveillance guys who are watchdogs are saying, who cares about the cake? All they need is the icing to make this thing go economically. Credits are worth that much. And if you're AVO Wind and you come in from Germany and you invest your money to build all these wind turbines on our land in remote places where people get accused of NIMBYism for questioning this because green is good, you get to sell those credits. And the value of those credits is going up by the day. And so they will likely be sold to somebody like Amazon to offset their emissions in a place like California. Now, I have a problem with that. I want Albertans to get that money. Am I being ridiculous?
I don't think so. I don't think so. And Danielle, you were nodding away there. And do you want to weigh in on this subject? I don't know if you're familiar with this
sure.
Particular farm.
I don't mind a discussion about wind, but it seems to me we don't talk about wind and the environmental impacts the same way we talk about any other energy source. So if we're going to compare green with green, let's talk about the migratory birds that get killed with these turbines. Let's talk about the bats that get killed. Let's talk about the fact that you can't build wind turbines with a wind turbine. You need to have steel, which you need fossil fuels for. You need cement, which you need fossil fuels for. You need fiberglass, which you need fossil fuels for. You need to transport it to site. Some of these, I don't know how big this one is, but it's 1,500 or more trips in traditional combustion engine vehicles to get it to site. So why aren't we talking about all of those carbon impacts? In addition, as I understand it, we don't have an effective way of decommissioning and recycling all the products all of the products at the end of life for these installations. And so we do have an imbalance in how we assess them. The other thing I worry about with wind, I was down in Montana, and one of the things they do in Montana is if you're going to sell renewable into the grid, you have to be able to firm it up. So if you say, I have 100 megawatts of power to sell, you have to always be able to sell 100 megawatts of power, which means you have to partner with something like natural gas to be able to make it work. The fact that they are able to come in get all of the different credits that that Don is talking about. In addition, not have the same scrutiny on the environmental side that we would have on our traditional industries, and then at the end of the day, mess up with the power grid because they can't provide reliable energy. I've looked at this every single year. When we get down to -30 in February, we have an air mass that sits on us, and none of those turbines move. When it gets cold and frozen, none of those solar panels are generating energy either. And so we have to recognize these are not year-round alternatives, and we have to judge them from a reliability standpoint as well. That's supposed to be what the electric system operator is supposed to do. And it seems like if everyone's chasing after the green credits, they're just not making the full assessment that they need to on the cost benefit.
Right, and we should also consider how much government money is thrown at these things by comparison to the oil and gas industry. Rob, you're the only person that hasn't jumped in on this one. Go ahead.
Well, I just echo everything that I've heard here. Danielle's outline of the environmental impacts of these wind farms is very true. There's a great book out. It's called Apocalypse Never. It's by Michael Schellenberger. He's an environmental activist, IPCC contributor. Certainly not a righty, very much on the left side of things, but someone who's actually truthful about climate alarmism and the damage he believes it's causing both the environmental movement and the environment. He talks a lot about solar farms and wind farms. And solar farms take 450 times more land than nuclear plants. And wind farms take 700 times more land than natural gas wells to produce the same amount of energy. And we are literally sitting on an ocean of clean burning natural gas, and we're getting better and more efficient at burning it and using it every day. That will not only heat our homes, but it could heat hundreds of millions of homes around the world, as I talked about earlier, in Asia and Africa and so forth, if we got our act together and didn't have a hostile federal government. And we can use all of these profits from the sale of that gas to develop and innovate tech in Alberta, which is fantastic. We have to be smarter on this issue, Bruce. Like, aside from, I'm not going to repeat what Danielle said, these things are just butt ugly. Okay, like, let's just call it a spade a spade. We have one of the most beautiful, pristine landscapes in the world here, especially on the eastern slopes. I do not want, and I'm sure the residents I know, in talking with several of them over the last week, because I knew we were talking about this issue, they are absolutely horrified by this. It's destroying their entire viewscape and landscape. They're ugly, and you can't just, at the end of life here, you don't just tear them down and throw them in the recycle bin at the curb. I mean, this is ridiculous. We're sitting on an ocean of natural gas, and all this is it's a scam. It's a way that a German company has found to come in here and use the carbon credit process and the funding that's made available to them from government and so forth, directly and indirectly, to make a buck. This isn't about the environment. It has nothing to do with the environment. If they did, they could make, they can make a far bigger difference by investing in LNG and getting it over to Asia if they wanted to actually work on reducing CO2 levels.
Loud and clear. I hear you, man.
It is just brutal, and we should show leadership here, and Kenny should be all over this. Like,
I hate to cut you off, Rob.
These blights on our landscape there,
especially when you're that passionate on an answer. I hate to cut you off, but we've got a couple things we want to get to before we run out of time in about 10 minutes. Don, I want you to close this one off for us and let us know what's the status of this hearing, what happens going forward.
All the proponent and all the objectors have been heard from. The AUC hearing has finished. They will announce their decision within 90 days, so we'll know by year end. The First Nations communities that are directly affected by this in Blackfoot in southern Alberta were objectors and pulled out at the very last minute, all three groups. The Majorville Medicine Wheel, which is a very significant religious site, a traditional site, is within viewscape of this particular installation of turbines. So it was very controversial. There's a lot at stake here. And once you put these things up, they're going to be with us for a long time. So I just, I want us to hear these people. I'm not, I get NIMBYism, but these people have a right to be heard. And I'm just not sure how many Albertans can and have.
Keep nerding out. Keep nerding out and listening to these things, and we'll keep having you back, Donna, to chat about them. Okay, so what do we do about what we're dealing with in Alberta? What can Albertans do? Well, Rob has authored, along with a couple of others, Barry Cooper and Derek Fromm, the Free Alberta Strategy. Rob, tee it up for us and tell us what you suggest that we might do in order to make Ottawa, frankly, hear the voices of Albertans.
Well, thank you for that. And I'm very interested to hear Donna's view on this, because I know that she was obviously on the Fair Deal panel and did a lion's share, like a lot of work on that, obviously. And there were some very good recommendations, which are part of the Free Alberta Strategy, virtually almost every one of them. I would say the main concept, because we're short on time, but the main concept is Alberta, in my view, Bruce, needs to declare itself a sovereign jurisdiction within Canada, much like Quebec has effectively done. They have their National Assembly. They pass laws that, like banning pipelines from crossing their borders, that are clearly unconstitutional, not in their purview, but they do it anyway. And Ottawa doesn't really have a choice but to respect that. And Alberta needs to, as we talked about before coming to air here, Alberta needs to get its elbows up here. Like, we are being attacked on every single side right now, but mostly by Ottawa. And when we're talking about what's happening in Confederation here, and what's happening is not just sucking resources out of Alberta. That's definitely still a problem, equalization and transfers and so forth. But this is an existential crisis. We are talking about the destruction of our most important, significant industry, not just in Alberta, but in all of Canada. And like, what country undertakes such a self-destructive course of action? We have to say, look, in Alberta, if you pass laws that interfere with our provincial jurisdictions, such as governance of our natural resources, we are not going to enforce those laws within the province. So carbon tax, we're not enforcing it here. We're not going to put that burden on our people and on our industry to enforce the carbon tax with any provincial agency or governed body. We need to start doing these things. And yeah, it's going to ruffle feathers, and maybe a little mini controlled constitutional crisis is what a country needs from time to time when it's become as dysfunctional as it is now. But that's kind of the foundational principle of the Free Alberta Strategy.
We'll probably make more time for it in a future episode, Rob. But having said what you just did, Danielle, we'll start with you, and then we'll go to Donna and allow her to make a comment and then wrap up. Okay, you hear a lot of talk about separation lately. I think this is where the rubber hits the road. Many Albertans are frustrated about what they see, but don't want to go that far. Is this a lever we need to pull? Do we need to be more aggressive?
Clearly we do. There's two things that I'll just jump off from what Rob said about how we assert ourselves. I remember being on a panel a few years ago with a Quebecer, and we talked about how Confederation should work. And it actually should work, ironically, a little bit more like the European Union. Instead of having Ottawa collect all the taxes and shoot the money back to us, we collect our own taxes and we decide what we're going to shoot to Ottawa. I mean, I don't know how it is that we gave up autonomy over that central tax collection role, because even if Ottawa argues they have an entitlement to every penny that they're taking from us, I think it would be good psychologically for us to be able to see just how much we're giving to Ottawa that gets dispersed into Quebec and the rest of the country. Right now it's intermingled. The other thing too is that we need to demonstrate that we have the capacity to do all of the things that an independent sovereign within Canada jurisdiction can do. And we haven't done that. So for me, collecting all of our own taxes first is the number one priority. Second, I was recently talking to somebody who is trying to create a bio-waste facility in Alberta. They said it's mystifying. In Quebec, you only have to go through one environmental review process. Quebec has the environmental authority. Once they've decided to approve it, it gets approved. We have two layers here. Not only does Alberta have an environmental review process, but doesn't get approved until Ottawa approves it. How come Quebec has autonomy on environmental approvals and we don't? Why is the federal government asserting that it should be able to approve our SAG-D projects or the Tech Frontier Mine or whatever other project we put forward? The answer is no. We just have to assert ourselves in the same way that Quebec has, and those would be the two places I'd start.
Okay, Donna, concluding thoughts both on this subject and on what we've discussed so far this evening.
I'm going to be a bit of a dissent here. I actually think we should put our elbows down a little. I was on the Fair Deal panel, and I was actually surprised that Kenny asked me to be on that panel because I think it was a case of keeping your enemies close. I learned a lot because I like to listen to Albertans, and they had a lot to say. And I think we dug into what the legal framework is, and I think there's a better understanding of what our legal rights are within Confederation. And that has a value to what both Danielle and Rob, what you're speaking to. We need to know our rights so that we can exercise them. But British Columbia has figured out a way to do the carbon tax in a way that's effective, and we could have done the same thing. Our industry here and innovators, and I'm not just talking about oil and gas, are doing leading edge stuff. AI out of Edmonton, like that's cutting edge. Machine learning, lots of stuff coming out of all over the province, ag, everywhere. I think we just need to keep doing what we're doing. And if we put our elbows down and stopped attracting all this drama, because we're like a lightning rod for it, right? If we could just say, you know what, we want people across Canada to thrive, all of us. We are only 4.5 million people here in Alberta. We contribute more than we take. You know what, for now, that's the deal, and we acknowledge it, but let's just move on and just allow us to be able to, whatever it takes. We might have to deke a little bit differently, and we might have to shoot from behind the neck from time to time, to throw in a hockey metaphor, Bruce. But we have to learn how to do it, and we have to be smart, and I think we're capable of it. But elbows up all the time, I just think it's a game that gets tired, and it's distracting, and it's distracting us from doing what we are capable of doing, which is a heck of a lot more. And I want us to spend our energy on that.
Well, I can tell you more people are shooting from behind the net. For what it's worth, the lacrosse move is making its way into the NHL. Don, I know you've got a jet, so thank you for your time tonight. I know Rob and Danielle are both going to probably disagree with some of what you said, but really appreciate you joining us.
I know.
One more plug for your book, okay?
Thank you. Okay.
The book one more time.
Teaching the Dinosaur to Dance.
That's right, and it's due out in the spring. Donna Kennedy Glenn, so good to have you. Thank you.
Thanks,
Rob. Boy, Donna packed a lot in there, and I think, to be fair, much of what she says is reasonable, but a lot of people are at the point where they said, we've been trying that strategy, we've been trying to do it that way, and it's not working. I mean, what would you say, first of all, to what Donna said, and concluding thoughts on what we've discussed so far this evening?
Well, anybody who knows hockey knows that you're not going to win too many games if you don't bang, crash, and get your elbows up in the corners from time to time, because you won't be respected and your space won't be respected. So I think that it is important. And I think that, frankly, we've had our elbows down for several decades now, where we basically just allowed Ottawa to run roughshod over our provincial jurisdictions, to rob us blind, frankly, $700 billion over 6 years in net equalization and transfers. We can't allow this to happen anymore, or we're going to be a has-been and a have-not. And that's not the Alberta that I want to live in. The Alberta I want to live in, and that I want to see kids live in, and friends and family, is a strong, prosperous, economically powerful province that is able to create the technologies to deal with some of these big world environmental issues, and do so on our terms, with our people and our money. And we need to stop being so deferential to the authority of Ottawa in order to get there. Because if we don't, I'm telling you, it's we're going to bleed out as a province. And if you want to look to what we'll look like, people aren't going to move here for our weather, that's for sure. We're going to look a lot like, who knows, other places that are far less prosperous and that we don't want to be like. So I think the strategy is a key piece of that. And I'm glad to see that, or hear that Danielle is understands so much of it and is supportive of it. So maybe we'll have to get an endorsement from you, Danielle.
Well said, Rob. Listen, thank you. And why don't we leave the last word to Danielle tonight on what you've heard from Donna and Rob on this subject, Danielle, and just in general, our conversation this evening.
Well, let me tell you the problem that I have in the position that I'm in is because I talk to innovators all the time, and I know that the innovators have taken the net zero challenge seriously, and they think they can do it. They think that not only this race to net zero is one that we should run, but that's one that we can win. But I feel like the polarization has gotten in the way of the conversation. So with Premier Kenney, he spent so much time fighting the carbon tax that I don't think he wants to talk about the things that I'm seeing about this type of innovation. And then on the other hand, if you believe the polls, it looks like Rachel Notley might be our next premier. Well, last time she got elected, she completely froze out the business community and wasn't interested in hearing what they had to say. So if you end up with our two political leaders not hearing from the innovators, and at the same time, you've got a mayor in Calgary, Jyoti Gondek, that doesn't know what's going on in her own backyard. At the same time, you've got a prime minister who thinks that we've got an industry that's stuck in the 1990s. I don't know how we move forward on finding that kind of collaboration and that sort of solution. That's where I'm feeling some frustration, is that it does seem to me like we are the most entrepreneurial place in the entire country. We have the best minds here. And what happens when we have downturn in our economy is everybody sits and thinks and gets creative, and then they come back even stronger. And I feel like we're on the cusp of doing that. But I don't think that the politicians understand just how much the industry is prepared to innovate, how quickly they're prepared to get there. And instead, we're setting up this polarization and this fight. That's what I worry about, is nobody's at the table. No one's talking to each other. And if we don't get people talking to each other, I think that the inevitable is going to happen. I don't know that this country can stay together.
Well, talking about it is exactly what we need to do. And that's what we tried to do tonight, and we'll continue to do. Danielle, thank you. And Rob, thank you both for being with us.
My pleasure.
Thanks, Bruce.
All right. Let me conclude with this tonight to those of you watching at home. We're going to do this Uncensored every week. We're going to do a segment. If you have some thoughts on what you'd like to see us discuss, some of the issues that you would like to see covered, send us an email. We'll certainly take it into account. Rob and Danielle will be regular panelists, and we'll bring a third in depending on the subject material. But frankly, Alberta's in a situation where many of these things are not getting the publicity that they need to. And we're going to do our best to give that to them and to bring some perspective and some insight on this political panel called Uncensored. Thank you for being with us tonight. We'll see you next week.